Now, there are more than one ways that you can graph a line. One of my favorites is the slope-intercept form. And what this means is that we're going to put our equations into a particular form before we try to graph them. So what I just wrote here is like the definition of what a slope-intercept form is or looks like. Everything has a meaning. For instance, your m is your slope. So whatever the coefficient of x is always your slope. Whereas b is always your y-intercept. This is where your line crosses the y-axis. Okay? So let's look at an example of that. Let's take the equation y equals negative 2 over 3x minus 1. So let's just verify what we just talked about. 1, the coefficient of x, which is negative 2/3, is your m. That's your slope. So my slope is negative 2/3. So I know that my line, after I graph it, is going to go down to the right because it's negative. I also know that negative 1 is my y-intercept. My line is going to cross the y-axis at negative 1. So let's draw this. Here's my graph. The one thing that I like about the slope-intercept form is once you have your equation in this form, you can just look at it and plot your points. So you always start with your y-intercept. That's like your starting point. So my y-intercept is negative 1. So on the y-axis, I'm going to start at negative 1. That's my first point. Now from that point, that's where I'm going to make the rest of my moves. So I always describe the slope as like your action. It tells you how to move and which way. So since my slope is negative 2 over 3, and I'll just rewrite it a little bigger, I know that I'm going to rise 2, and I'm going to run 3. Now again, I can see that my slope is negative, so I don't want to forget that. So from my y-intercept, or from my starting point, I'm just going to go down 2 because 2 is negative, and I'm going to run 3. 1, 2, 3. So my next point is down 2 over 3. It lands right here. And again, I started at the y-intercept. And we can keep going. From this point, let's go down 2 over 3. 1, 2, 3. So this is my next point. So notice that I get a straight line here. Okay? Now I went down 2 because 2 was negative, and I went to the right 3 because 3 was positive. The clue here is to use the negative symbol only one time. Okay? For instance, if I started at my y-intercept and I decided to go up 2, 1, 2. 2 is up in the positive direction, so then I would have to go 3 in the negative direction. But you can see that my point still lines up with the rest of the dots that I've already plotted. So let's do some examples. I have y equals negative 4x minus 3. Let's identify our parts. My y-intercept, or my starting point, is negative 3, and my slope is a negative 4. Okay, so let's use those two pieces of information to make my graph. Again, you always start with your y-intercept, so I'm going to start at negative 3 on the y-axis, again because your y-intercept is where your line is going to cross the y-axis, so that's my first point right there. Now from the y-intercept, I'm going to use the slope, which all whole numbers are written as a fraction by putting them over 1, and again, the top number tells me the up and down, and the bottom number tells me the left to right. Now from my starting point, which is my y-axis at negative 3, I'm going to go down 4 because 4 is negative. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to go over 1 in the positive direction. Now, so I can do the exact same thing but going the other way. So starting from negative 3, where my y-intercept is, this time I'm going to go up 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you're probably saying, but wait, that's positive. Well, since I went up in the positive direction, when I go over 1, I'm going to have to go over in the negative direction. So again, you have to use that negative symbol one time. You either have to use it at the top or use it at the bottom. You just can't use it twice. But again, notice my dots lined up anyway. Let's look at another one. Let's look at example negative 3x plus 4y equals 8. Now this does not look like the rest of our equations. It's not in y equals mx plus b form. Okay? So what we need to do is solve for y. Put it in slope-intercept form so you can use this technique. So to solve for y means I'm going to move 3x to the other side by making it positive. So I'm left with 4y equals 3x plus 8. And to get y by itself, I need to divide by 4. Now remember, you're dividing everything by 4. So I end up with y equals 3 over 4x plus 2. Now my equation is in slope-intercept form. So 3 over 4 is my slope, and I'm just taking note that it's positive. So I'm going to have a graph that goes up to the right. And my y-intercept is a positive 2. Okay, so let's look at my graph. So I'm going to start at the y-intercept, which is positive 2. So there's my first dot on the y-axis, positive 2. And from that point, I'm going to use my 3 over 4, which is up 3 and over 4. So from the y-intercept, I'm going to go up 3, 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to go over 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So up 3, 1, 2, 3, over 4. There's my point. Now back to the y-intercept. Let's go the other way. So remember I said you only use the negative sign once. But don't forget, a negative divided by a negative is a positive. So let's try that. Let's go down 3. 1, 2, 3. Which is negative, and let's do negative again, negative 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I went down 3 and over 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Notice that this dot still lines up with the rest of them because a negative over a negative is a positive, and that's the same slope. You also need to be able to work backwards, which means not only do you have to be able to look at an equation and graph the line, but you also have to be able to look at the line and give me the equation. So for instance, let's just make one up. So this is my graph. And I want you to write me an equation that looks like this. So the same way you take those two pieces of information to make the graph, you need to look at the graph and grab those two pieces of information. So looking at the picture, where does my line cross the y-axis? I can see that it crosses it at negative 2. So the first part of my equation is going to be y equals, I don't know what m is yet, x. And the b, the y-intercept, is negative 2. So now I have to figure out the slope. Well, from this point to this point, how many did I go up? I went up 2, which is my rise, and I went over 1, which is my run. We all know that 2 over 1 is just 2. So my equation for this line is y equals 2x minus 2. Let's make up another one. So that was number 1. Let's look at number 2. Okay. So let's say this is my line. Again, I need those two pieces of information. What's the y-intercept and what's the slope? Let's start with the starting point. Where's my line crossing the y-axis? It's crossing right in the middle, which is the origin, which is 0. So I'm going to write plus 0. So I know it's going to be y equals, let's figure out the slope. From the 0 to this next point, you can see I go up 2. So there's my rise over run. I'm running 1. Again, writing it in simplified form, 2 over 1 is just 2x, and I don't have to write the plus 0 because it's plus what? Plus nothing. So don't write it. You know that the intercept is at the origin. Let's look at some more. Let's try... Let's see. So the previous two examples were all positive slopes. Okay? But as we can see, this slope is going down to the right as I read it from left to right. So this is going to be a negative slope. So again, I want my equation to be y equals mx plus b. I know my slope is going to be negative. And let's look at our y-intercept. My y-intercept is negative 3. So I'm going to have y equals some number, x, minus 3. Now let's look at the slope. From this point to the next point, you can see I went up 3. 1, 2, 3. And I went over 1, 2, 3. And we already said that this is negative, so I don't want to forget that. But 3 over 3 is what? Just a negative 1x minus 3, or I could even just write negative x minus 3. These technically are the same answer. Let's just do a couple more. Okay, where does this line cross the y-axis? It's crossing the y-axis at 1. So I know b is going to be plus 1. It's going to be y equals some number x. So how much did it take from this point to this point? I can see that I went up 2 and I went over 1. So that simplifies to 2x plus 1. So don't forget, if your equation is not in y equals mx plus b form, you need to solve for y. You always need the two pieces of information. One is the slope, and one is the y-intercept. When trying to graph your line, you always start with the y-intercept. And from that point, use the slope to find more points on the same line.